taffy. Now, I know most of you have probably eaten a little taffy in your life, but this is a different kind. It was a warm, sunny, beautiful spring day in 1996. And the winter before had given us lots of snow, and so the rivers were running full. And I thought our students, and Rochelle was a student at that time at our school, would enjoy seeing a river in full spring flood. So we drove down to Blankenship Bridge. At the bridge, the water was roaring, it was chocolate brown, and it was actually humped in the middle because of friction on the side. It was roaring so fast. That's where the North Fork and the Middle Fork joined. As they walked up to the river's edge and watching the water, all of a sudden we heard a little peep, 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 peep. We looked around, and here in an eddy behind the log, with that water roaring past, was this little tiny yellow fluff ball. We had no idea what it was, but it was going round and around, hopelessly locked into this water. It was running out of strength. It wouldn't have been long and it would have been dead. So Rochelle and others, they got a little stick and they went out and they kind of worked at it and finally got it towards the shore, picked it up, and the little guy, he was wet, he was cold. Rochelle stuck him up on her shoulder under her hair, and he went sound asleep. We came home, and as we approached our driveway and our circle drive, Rochelle wanted to go over to the fountain in the middle and wash her hands, and so she took the little guy out, put him on the grass, and started walking away. And pretty soon some of the students said, "Rochelle, you need to turn around." She turned around, and here was this little tiny fluff ball tumbling over the grass, trying to get closer to Mama. The two of them bonded right away, and Rochelle eventually took him up to her room. She got a little box. She put a little table lamp that she used for study over the top of him, and that's where he lived for the next little bit. She fed him whatever we could. We had no idea what it was. I figured it was a duck or something that had been washed away. One of the things she always remembers is he would go sound asleep with the warmth of the light. So eventually she needed to go into the little bathroom that she had, and she'd wait till his eyes were closed and he'd kind of fall over and she'd sneak away. But every time, just as soon as she got up, he would wake up, he would see that she was gone, and he would come to the edge of her study desk and literally fall over the edge, roll on the floor to follow her around. They were inseparable. He grew, and she began to feed him whatever it was, but he liked greens, and so she was gathering handfuls and bagfuls of dandelion greens and grass and all the rest of it. I thought it was great because a lot of the dandelions on the lawn were disappearing. As he grew a little bit larger, it became obvious about 2 months later that this wasn't a duck. This was a Canada goose. He got bigger and bigger, and he ate more and more. And it became clear that we really needed to get him back in the wild because this was actually, a game bird. So, at this point, we decided if he was ever going to get back in the wild, he needed to learn to fly. Now, the problem was that everybody in his family walked, including our wonderful dog, Nicky, at the time, who was a mix between Husky and Blue Heeler. So, as he got about this age, that long neck came out, and he was always going around kind of like this and cooing. He couldn't honk yet, and cooing. And because he was going back and forth, hence the name Taffy. Taffy grew and got bigger and bigger. We never really knew if it was a male or a female. It's hard to tell until somebody drops an egg. He never did, so it was a he to us. So the flight lessons were going to have to begin. How do you teach a goose who's never seen anybody in his life fly how to fly? Rochelle would take him out in the circle drive where there's nice soft grass, and she would hold him down low and kind of give him a little nudge like this, and he would flop out of her hands, tumble into the grass, roll over, and crash. And like, why are you doing this? She kept after that and after that, and eventually he would flap his wings just a little bit. She worked at it till she could launch him from about here and throw him out, and he would glide just a little bit, but almost never made a glorious landing. This went on for weeks until finally she thought he could float in the air well enough that the final test was given. She took him up in her arms to the roof of the solarium, and with fond hope she launched him out towards the fountain in the circle drive where the soft grass was. He wobbled around like this. He'd never flown that much. He glided. He ended up crash landing in the grass, rolled over, got up, gave out a honk, and he was as proud as could be. And from that time on, he could fly. But what was he going to do with his newfound skill? Rochelle would ride her bike around our place and to the neighbors, and Taffers would fly right along beside her, about 3 or 4 feet off the ground, wings almost touching her handlebars, and follow her everywhere she went. When she would stop, he would glide to a stop, skid, come back, honking and doing that little thing that they always do. They became close friends. We forgot, though, that if he could fly, he now had access to the forbidden city, which was our garden. He loved greens, and one day when we were out in the garden weeding, here came Taffy flying over the fence, landed in the garden, walked up to see what we were doing. We were weeding down some of the rows of lettuce and greens and so on, and Taffy watched what we were doing, and we were very concerned that we were going to lose our garden. And it beggars belief, but he watched what plants we were pulling. And as he would go down the row, he would pull only the chickweed and the dandelions and the other weeds, and he'd leave all the lettuce and chard and kale. And at this point we said, we have just gotten onto the best thing for gardeners ever. When the world finds this out, we're going to be rich. Taffers did this for several days. And then one day, as he was walking down a lettuce row, he made a mistake. He pulled a couple of lettuce plants. And all of a sudden he started to honk, and he announced, guys, we've been pulling the wrong stuff. And this lettuce tastes way better than that chickweed. And as he started down a row of lettuce, gobbling as fast as he could, I took out after him as fast as I could run. He saw me coming. He grabbed as much as he could, stuffed it in his mouth, took off before I could catch him, and floated over the fence. And so ended Taffy's weeding career. Now, Nikki, our dog, loved to go ground squirreling. And we needed that because ground squirrels tried to get in our garden. Yeah, can I borrow? And Taffy went everywhere that Nikki went. Now, Nikki would go off in the woods, and it's a little hard for a goose to just go through the woods, but he would clamber over logs and underbrush and around all these piles of stuff until he found where Nikki was, digging away in a ground squirrel hole. Nikki would dig and dig, but eventually get a little tired, and when he got tired, Taffy would come up and stick that foot-long neck down in the hole, take a good look, come back out and announce, yep, there's a ground squirrel down there, keep digging. They would do that for an hour and finally come home. And when they got home, Nikki's nose was covered with mud, and Taffy's neck, all the way to his beak, was totally totally covered with dirt, happy as could be. His flight prowess did come in handy, though. We generally didn't let Taffy in the house. He had this nasty habit of dropping green bombs in inappropriate places. We had a box for him, but it didn't always stay, and so usually he was sitting on the front porch. And one morning we were having breakfast, and he was out on the porch sitting. We couldn't see out the front door. We were in the dining room, and all of a sudden there was this terrible honking noise, the worst I'd ever heard him give. And we looked out through the kitchen window, and here was Taffy flying about 4 feet above the ground as fast as he could down the trail heading for our driveway. Rochelle was sure she was going to lose her best friend, and so she ran to the front door fast, flung the door open, was going to step outside to run after him, and here was a grizzly bear 10 feet away. That grizzly bear had discovered Taffy and was about to go after him. Taffy took off. At that moment, with the door open, Nicky, the dog who had been inside, squirted past Rochelle and took out after the grizzly bear. Rochelle then went after both of them. The grizzly bear, for some illogical reason, decided that Nicky was a threat, took off into the woods. Nicky did a whole somersault down the little hill to our trail, and Rochelle, and by then I was going too, headed out, and we found Taffy about 300-400 feet away down the driveway, whimpering to himself. Rochelle went up, picked him up, and you know, Canada goose can honk a lot, but they have this beautiful little cooing sound when they're scared and when they love you, and that's all he did in her ear. She carried him back to the house. It's a good thing he could fly. Taffy had another wonderful, I guess you'd call it recreation. The kids, our students, in the evenings would have recreation time, and one of their favorite things would play volleyball. We had a volleyball court set up, and Taffy would come out there or fly out there, and he would sit right at the line of scrimmage where the net was and watch like this, back and forth, as the ball would go back and forth. And when somebody scored, they would give out a yell, and he would honk and honk and honk and take off after the ball. It got to be a little problem because he was always underfoot, but he enjoyed volleyball. You wonder, what does a goose eat all the time? I found out that they do eat something besides greens. About that time, I was milling some very long beams out in the woods with our chainsaw mill. I had no equipment. I couldn't move big logs, so when we had a big tree, this one had blown down, I just took the chainsaw out in the woods and would mill it in place. And then it would get down to, I was milling 6x8 beams. These were 27 feet long. I was out milling. Taffy would hear the sound and want to come where somebody was. So he was actually pretty good at flying in open areas, but flying right through trees in the woods, he wasn't really very good. He would come in bouncing and careening off of branches, trying to find his way down, and eventually tumble and crash land in the woods. And then he'd walk very proudly up to where I was sawing. I figured, well, a chainsaw, he's not going to come anywhere close. It was roaring. He came right up to where I was, saw what I was doing, hopped up on the guide board that was on top of the log with the chainsaw running, and would walk right down in front of the saw, and every little bit he'd reach down at the back of the saw and grab a whole mouthful of sawdust and eat it happily. And I figured, you know, why have we been spending money on food for this critter when he just eats sawdust? He would go all the way to the end of the log, and when we got to the end of the 27-foot cut, which took quite a while, he was indignant that I would push him off the log, and he'd have to jump on the ground. He'd walk all the way back down and do it over and over and over again. As time went on, we were hoping that we could get him to migrate. So as fall came, every time a wedge of geese would fly over, we would rush him outside, point his head up to the leaden sky, and they'd hear the honking, and he would listen, and we would launch him off into the blue. He would fly off a little ways, circle a little bit, and I imagine in his mind he was looking up and saying, you know, I could go for the uncertainty of freedom, or I could go back down with all these odd-looking birds that I live with. He always came back. By the time winter came along, it was clear he wasn't going to go anywhere, at least not that year. So we installed him in our solarium. He happily stayed in there all winter. He splashed and dove and swam in the pool. He would sit by the students as they were doing their tests in the little classroom. He became a part of our family. By spring, he made it through the winter. It came to the point where he decided he could ski just like the kids. We had packed snow on our driveway. We live up on a hill. And one of the kids' favorite things to do was to tie ropes on the back of the old pickup. I would pull them up the hill. They would throw the ropes loose, and then they'd all zoom down the hill. Taffy learned that. He would come out. He would walk up with the kids, and when we got to the top and they would head down as fast as they could go, he'd fly again just 3 feet off the ground right beside them, diving in between all the skiers. They get to the bottom, they do a hockey stop. He realized he had to stop. He simply would glide down and ski the rest of the way down. I had no idea, never looked. They have hooks on the bottom of their pads, and he would use those to stop. As you all know, anything from the wild never lives that long. Taffy was no exception. But I can tell you this, Taffy brought us a tremendous amount of affection, love, joy, laughter. He will always live in our hearts. Taffy's out there someplace. In the sphere, he's in our hearts. Goodbye, Taffy.